It's an absolute pleasure and privilege to introduce Dr. Gurmeet Singh as our fifth speaker in the Ayurveda Biology webinar series. The intention of this webinar is to create awareness among students and individuals, knowledge seekers, about the potential of doing Ayurveda and contemporary biological studies side by side. And Dr. Gurmeet is a beautiful example of this particular concept. Right? So Dr. Gurmeet got his undergraduate from IIT Delhi and then went to do a PhD at Penn State and joined briefly for a faculty position before joining HUL and worked there for several years. So he's also extremely dynamic because he has experiences from so many different domains. And from HUL, he joined the Transdisciplinary University. And he's really brought a very interesting perspective to the university in terms of looking at foods and food products, both in terms of the traditional usages and how to imagine them for contemporary applicability. I think it is very difficult for us to sort of understand the shift, right? I mean, we've all been eating ghee for so many years, but Gurmeet is the kind of person who comes on board and says, can we imagine the ghee in a completely different format that you can pop in your mouth, probably like candy, but won't have as much sugar. So it's this interesting way of combining traditional knowledge, contemporary usage, and most importantly, in the context of health and well-being, that he really combines all of these together. So today, our intention in inviting him was first to give us a little bit of a idea of the personal journey, and the topic that he chose was personalized nutrition, how he approaches it, right? So he's been trained as a scientist and now he joined the traditional food knowledge consortia, in a sense, ecosystem. How is he visualizing that? And we have specifically asked him to also inform the students how having perspectives from two domains that seem so utterly different and dissonant from each other can actually make you a more competitive candidate in the job market. So with that introduction, welcome, Dr. Gurmeet. Look forward to your talk.
Thanks, Megha, for the kind introduction, and hopefully you can see my slides. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Slide level. Yes.
Okay. Welcome everyone, and hope you have a enjoyable hour or so. As Megha just said, okay, maybe before I just wanted to advertise here. I mean, one, of course, is that if you need to contact me, my contact details are there, my email address and my Twitter account. Also, plugging in our YouTube channel, and I hope all of you during this talk can quickly go over and subscribe to this YouTube channel, which we're just starting with recipes, but more and more things will start coming up on this YouTube channel, right? So do subscribe, and any comments that you have for what you would like to see on the channel, love to hear that as well. Yeah, Ayur Ahar 5568. I don't know why the number 5568, but probably Ayur Ahar was taken. So yeah. Also would like to acknowledge RIST here, Rural India Supporting Trust, because they fund a lot, a big part of our program. And one of the reasons I'm here at TDU is because of the project that on food futures and holistic nutrition that they have sponsored in the past year. Today's talk is around integrative nutrition theory for mass personalization of food. And that's an example to kind of talk about my career trajectory, the experiences with leveraging Ayurveda for public health through food, and advice to graduates. I don't know how many graduate students on the call, but those are the three things, as Megha said, to kind of touch upon briefly. So my career, I'm a chemical engineer by training, and went to the US to do my PhD. Was designing bioreactors to grow plant tissue culture. in those days, and kind of held the world record for some time for having the largest bioreactor to grow hairy root cultures, no plants, and uh, uh, and then came back to India. Was a faculty there for a few years, 3 years, then came back to India. Department of Biotechnology, Biochemical Engineering at IIT Delhi. Spent a year there, again designing bioreactors, plant tissue culture, and then moved to Unilever for 20 years. Was working on uh, tea largely, tea as in chai, right? And I wondered when I joined the company, actually, I wasn't looking for that job, and they weren't looking for me for the job as well. They wanted my wife, who worked in the area of computer simulations, and we were in Delhi. So if they needed, the job was in Bangalore, so they realized that they would have to hire the husband as well, right? If they wanted Janvi to move. So they interviewed me, and then I think they wondered as to where to put a biochemical engineer who worked on plants, and the nearest match they could get was probably tea. So they put me in the tea department. Unilever had two big brands, Lipton and Brook Bond, a couple of $1 billion in sales every year. So that's where I ended up. The one question they hadn't asked me during the interview, as I said, is that do I drink tea? And I had never had a cup of tea till that time, right? I was about 32 years of age and had not drunk tea because my some hangover from my dad, who never wanted kids to drink tea, and I never took to that. So milk was my big drink, but no tea. But uh, soon I started. So I approached my job, my first career with tea, as a scientist. And so I would brew samples, I would process tea, I would take some samples, inject for HPLC, GCMS, look at the molecular profiles, come up with theories, but not really drink tea in the first year. But a few visits to the plantation, and you start falling in love. Yeah, at least with the tea and tea industry. And so those 20 years of journey was a journey of falling in love with tea, and asking a lot of, being curious about tea, asking a lot of questions around tea, and led to uh, a startup by the end of it, right? I created a little bit of a startup, which is kind of on sleep mode right now because I've got too busy with my current academic work. Uh, but it was a fascinating journey. And I think the message there is that uh, life takes you to places where uh, it's you haven't really planned for, right? It takes you to places. And as long as you are curious, about things, I think that's what being a romantic is, being curious about things, asking questions about things, and try and find answers to it. I think your career will do fine, right? You will at least have fun, maybe not too much of money, but you will have fun during that journey and sit back, have a good night's sleep every day. So I think staying curious and then making an effort to find answers to those curiosity is scientist's career, right? So that's the first part, right? Experiences with the leveraging Ayurveda, I think let's uh, progress with the journey. And as I said, the example I'm using today is personalized nutrition. So why personalized nutrition, right? If you look at, and I've just taken one slice of the many health challenges that face our country as well as global, right? So here are some data sets from a few years ago, right? That on one hand, we have a huge population which suffers from undernutrition, right? We take anemia, 50% of the population seems to be anemic. We take vitamin B12, there are reports that here 70% of the population could be deficient there. We have a On the other hand, we have the absolute opposite, right, which is about obesity. And we have a huge section of population which seems to be obese, not just uh, uh, globally, but in India as well, right? So 150 million obese Indians has doubled in the last 10 years. That's massive, right? And we know that how that seems to be linked or correlates to how obesity correlates with so many of the newer diseases as well. And that's what the third chart here, if you go clockwise, right, shows where the top 10 global causes of death a lot of them are blue bars, and all the blue bars are non-communicable diseases, right? So if we had taken this snapshot, this 216 data, if you had taken 1996 data, it would all have been the red orange bars, no, the rust color bars, which is the communicable disease would have dominated. So over the last 20 years, the mortality reasons for mortality have completely shifted, right, to NCDs. And we in the last chart here is the taken from the economic survey, India Economic Survey 2018-19, no, which talks about the population above 60, right? And that's rising from about 100 million in 2011 to about 250 million in 2041, which is not too far away. And I think that's a perfect storm kind of which is approaching us, which really we are not thinking about, because more and more people in the 60 plus population, that's where the NCDs start hitting us even more. Mental health also becomes a big question. And so there are so many challenges which are going to be facing us in 20 years of time. So today, if we think it's a challenge, 20 years, it'll be a perfect storm. So we do need to really be thinking about these things. And then over the last, I think, the COVID years, what we've also figured out, what has become clear, all the scientists already knew, but what has become clear to the common person on the street as well, is this connection between the three things, right? The chronic diseases, the nutritional deficiencies, and the infectious diseases, right? So COVID was the infectious disease, and we realized that hey, comorbidities of chronic diseases uh, uh, could take serious turns, right? And similarly, nutritional deficiencies, a lot of people were suddenly popping vitamin pills and iron pills and zinc pills, etc. I wouldn't really advise that, but a lot of people were doing because they realize there is some kind of a correlation, right? And so our goal here, big goal, therefore, we look at is when you look at uh, public health expenditure by the government, that's minuscule, right? 1 to 1.5%, right? At best, that you would say. A lot of that is actually going towards the 3 tiers of curative health. Uh, and if you want to really tackle this at scale for every Indian, then what we are proposing in our university, we're looking at a university, is a fourth tier, right, of public health, which is a preventive health tier, which all of us have in our hands, executed by the digital platforms that are becoming very popular and certainly will be there over the next 10 years in everybody's hands, right? So, and that's the low cost of healthcare that we kind of proposing. And we feel personalized nutrition will play a big part in there. Yeah. And so the question that many ask is that, okay, first, well, low cost, fourth tier is something that we understand, but why this emphasis on personalized nutrition, right? And the reason we talk about personalized nutrition, this is kind of becoming more and more clearer across the world, right? If you look at our nutritional guidances, we could say our population level guidances largely today, right? And we've realized that population level guidances can only get us so far. They don't seem to be effective when we talk about especially the NCDs, right? Where personalized nutrition seems to seems to have the potential to play a bigger role, right? And the other reason for that is that all of us are unique, right? Every individual is unique. 2002 is when the Human Genome Project, right? We were able to read our genomic maps, and we know that we are unique, no, genotypic wise. Microbiome wise, we are even uh, more variable, more unique. I mean, genome wise, 99% similar, 99% similar. Microbiome wise, only 30 to 40% similarity. So really where we differ probably is in our epigenome and in our microbiome, right? The variations across a lot of individuals. Then the bioregulation, right? Which is the metabolic responses that we have to various foods. And one such example is this chart, which really brought to fore the personalized nutrition from a data end, right? We all knew that we were kind of we respond to food differently on the same table in the family. Some of us can digest milk, some can't. Some are okay with eating cholas and rajma. The others don't want to because it leads to cramps. A few hours after consumption. So we knew all these things, right? But this paper that I keep talking about, 2014, Zivi et al., from Eran Siegel's and Eran Elnav's lab in Israel, where they took about 1,000 people and stuck these continuous glucose monitoring probes. At that time, it was a rarity. It wasn't that common. Today, it's become very common, such studies. And they took a few parameters, like they measured the microbiome, the blood test. They had some questionnaires on diet, anthropometrics, a food diary, and they put into a model, and they came up with a predictive model. They came up with two conclusions, right? Response to food varies from person to person. Postprandial response to same food is different from different people. And this chart on the right kind of shows that. No, two pieces, banana and cookies, same amount fed to various participants is participant number 445, flat line of glucose post-eating, that the serum glucose, blood glucose, no excursion kind of post-eating cookies, but banana gives a peak. And here participant 644, where the bananas give a flat line and cookies give a peak. So that was fairly interesting. And first time that people are showing actual data with respect to that. And then an individual's postprandial response to different foods can, therefore, they said that, hey, if I have these parameters, I can actually take and predict who will respond to what food, who will have a peak for banana and who will have a flat line for banana, right? To be predicted. So that kind of set the world afire, or the science world afire, on personalized nutrition. And from there on, there's been a regular stream of publications coming around personalized nutrition, right? But this was one of the first, if not the first, yeah. So in our lab also, we've been working on this. I'd seen this paper about 2014 when it came out. Now it has, I don't know how many thousands of citations, so quite popular paper. And so when I joined TDU, one of the goals was to create this personalized nutrition program. And this is kind of a schematic that I show, that what would it take, right? Which is, let's call an individual here at the center. I call individual named me. And uh, this person, of course, there are inputs of the season, the time of the day, the place where a person lives. Those are some inputs as well, which go into the person. There's a well-being analyzer. So the status of how well a person is, is known through this. And the well-being actual versus a well-being goal or a standard for the person's age and place, etc., is what we call as the well-being error. There's some error, let's say, right, coming on. So this is a comparator C, which compares the current well-being versus what should the well-being be. And that goes into a diet recommender. Hey, this is the well-being status, and so what should be the diet? The other inputs to the diet are the body type analyzer, right? What is the body type of the person? And then, of course, the diet recommendation should have some kind of a food database to pick up properties of food, which it could then map onto this body type and the wellness status error, right? And recommended diet. So that spits out some kind of an ideal diet, which is then compared to the actual diet that a person is having. And that's the diet error. What's the gap difference between what someone is eating and what someone should eat? And that diet error is fed to the person, who can then take a corrective action. And then after some time, the well-being analyzer can analyze the well-being. And so this becomes kind of a dynamic system, because your seasons, the season, the day, the place where you live, that keeps changing and is input. And so that kind of becomes a dynamic program. The logic here being that if the error in diet is large, which is your ideal diet for your body type, for your place of residence, for the season, if that is large, then it probably will lead to a larger error in your wellness. And if you could reduce the error in your wellness, if you could reduce the error in your diet, you will probably reduce the error in the wellness, which is that you will be working at your ideal self, right? To be able to execute this schematic, this algorithm, you need a few things. You need a body typing equation, a well-being assessment analyzer. You need a food typing database, because you need food properties of food. You need a diet tracking, right, to be there. And you need some programs, which is the algorithm for diet recommendation, the diet error comparing the algorithm program, and the well-being error program, right? So those are things that you will require to develop. And over the next few charts, I will kind of take you through some of those things, right? And this is a simplified version that, hey, we need a body type, we need to characterize all the foods, we need to map a mapping algorithm for this, and that we need a wellness that will kind of go to the wellness of the individual. So we need to assess the wellness, underpinned by probably culinary science, because food types we need to cook, and they need to be tasty. So there's culinary science which gets in. There's some food and health computing tools, some device and variables which could assist in this whole kind of a program. So let's begin with the mapping algorithm, right? Which is saying that, okay, we have convinced ourselves that personalized nutrition is required, and we now therefore require to map my body type with the food type. And so how will I map is the big question. Is there a nutrition theory which allows me to map? And so I go and start searching for nutrition theories. And of course, there is this classical nutrition theory which is available to us. Classical nutrition theory is what we all learn in our nutrition programs, which says that, hey, food chemistry should match body chemistry, right? That's the classic nutrition theory. It focuses on the 20,000 or so genes that we have. So when I say chemistry, body chemistry, it's not just chemistry, but the biochemistry as well, which is dictated by the 20,000 or so genes that we have, because each gene makes a protein, and a lot of those proteins have to do with our biochemistry, right? What happens to food. So that's the classical nutrition theory. Over the last 20 years, 2002 onwards, the tools that we developed for the Human Genome Project been beginning to apply it to microbiome, to study what lives inside us, what other living things live within us. And we've realized now that we are actually a small part, right? The human cells are only a small part of the total cells in us. Actually, about 40 million, 38 trillion bacterial cells versus 30 trillion human cells, right? So that ratio is probably 60-40. But then if you start looking at the genes, 20,000 human genes versus about 2 million microbial genes in us. So that's massive. So that's what the microbiome reflects, not just the number of species, but also the genes. And a lot of these encounter food first, right? Especially the food that we don't, the not so simple molecules, no? Such as fiber, which goes all the way down 100%, such as polyphenols, which pretty much 95% go down to the gut. Iron, for example, we know that from vegetarian diets, 3 to 5% gets absorbed, which means the rest of it gets down to the gut, right? The proteins, we know plant proteins are not digested that easily, 60%, 70% digestibility, the rest of it goes down to the gut. So there's a lot of stuff which interacts with the microbiome. And the microbiome scientists, actually, if you start following them, what they're saying is, hey, classical nutrition, the classical nutritionists have an approach that, hey, microbiome can plug some gaps in the classical nutrition theory, whereas the microbiome nutrition guys say, hey, we need to pull down the classical nutrition theory and erect a new wall, right, which comprises of both of these, right, together. It's a new theory rather than put patches, right, on the previous one. And then if we go to our classical literature, the Ayurveda nutrition, we realized actually, there is another view of personalized nutrition coming, which from the Ayurveda perspective is Agni-centric theory of nutrition, as we call it. And the emphasis here is not just on what to eat, what classical nutrition, microbiome nutrition are largely suggesting, but the greater emphasis on Ayurvedic nutrition, that's how it differs, is that it emphasizes how to eat, before what to eat, right? And almost is saying that if you are getting what to eat right, but not eating it right, which is getting how to eat right, then all that is useless, right? So get how to you eat right, and even if it is inadequate, right, in terms of portion sizes, etc., if how to eat is right, then it is more effective, right, than everything else. So, and then of course it has to do with the Rasha, Dosha, personalization, the three rhythms, synchronization, the life stage, seasonal rhythm, diurnal rhythm, and let's talk about that in our future slides. So, and what we are looking at, our integrative approach, we are saying, hey, we need to look at all three of these. We are not at loggerheads with any, but we need to be able to synthesize them together, these three, and integrate them together into one theory, executable nutritional framework, which everybody can use, right? So, and decomplicate it. And that we call as Ayur Ahar, right? Or food for life, right? Which is an integration synthesis of what to eat with how to eat. Yeah. So a little bit more on the Ayurveda framework. On the left, of course, I have the modern science framework. I've taken this picture from, I forgot to put the reference there, but the book is called Burn by Pontzer, Pontzer. I love this picture there. Uh, and very simplistically, because it's not written for scientists per se or nutrition scientists, but the general audience popular science book. And where he talks about, hey, there is this diet, what we eat, and you could look at macromolecules, carbohydrates, fats, proteins. We have the gut digestion, or the stomach, small intestine, large intestine, etc., where the big molecules get broken down into simpler molecules like glucose, like fatty acids, glycerides, like amino acids, which are then absorbed, because the big molecules are not what are getting actually absorbed. And then the fate of them, which is either goes towards building or burning, right? And those schematic shows what happens in the build stage and what happens at the burn stage. The burn stage is the energy stage, and the build stage is then either storing it or taking it forward, right? So that's the modern view of nutrition, right? Ayurveda's view is that, hey, food is we acted upon by Agni, and there are various levels of Agnis as well. So it's acted upon by Agni. And if the Agni is right, then there are two outcomes to the food, or there are two fates to the food. Part of it is, of course, waste, called mala, and thrown out. Uh, and the rest is absorbed into tissues, right, which is called converted to rasadhatu, and then into the various other tissues, the rakta, mamsa, medas, asti, maja, and shukra, right? And this happens, the setting of the Agni, whether it's right or wrong, a lot of play happens based on our doshas, right, which is our response to stimuli, right, the dimensions of it. And we'll come to doshas in the next few slides. So, and if the fate of food, if the Agni is not right, then besides these two, there is misfiring of digestion as well. And this misfiring of digestion or maldigestion leads to what is called as ama, which is stuff which the body doesn't know what to do with, right? It can't be absorbed, it can't be thrown out. It's stuck in the body somewhere, right? And the body has no use for it, no idea what to do with it. So of course, this thing is floating around and then gets stuck wherever, and depending on where it gets stuck, it may express in some kind of a disease, right? And so this production of ama will lead to stress for the body, right? Because an unwanted thing in the body, and continued stress may lead to, accumulation of that accumulated stress would lead to some disease later on, right? So I like this theory because this kind of gels very well with what we today are looking at postprandial analysis, right? Because this Agni, the state of Agni decides how will be the fate of food, right? And whether what kind of lipid response we have in our blood, what glucose response, what insulin response. No, those are three things which are beginning to get measured at multiple time points post eating food, which is the postprandial state. So, and that data is beginning to get available, right? And I think that's the exciting frontier, that this kind of collection data allows now us for to start testing some of the Ayurvedic models, right, on food, which earlier we couldn't, right? We call Ayurveda as a systemic view of various biological phenomena. And the reason systemic view have not been looked at so far in the last 500 years or so has been because we've had no measurement tools, right? Systemic require your time-dependent responses, right? And not a static response or one-off response. So a temperature measurement at one point can tell me whether I have fever or not, but is not that great in telling me whether I will fall ill or not, right, later on. Whereas if you have a trend of temperature through the day for many days, you are able to get into that preventive mode, into a systemic response. If you're able to uh, pick up a trend of glucose levels in blood post eating food or insulin levels post eating food. So it's the trends which allow us to figure out our preventive regimen, whereas 1 point measurements are more to tell whether I have a expressed disease or not, right? So, so I think those tools are emerging. They require almost like online measurements, regular measurements. They require a lot of data gets generated, so they require data management, data collection, data storage, analytics, new statistics for that, and all those tools uh, in free living models, as we call, versus the RCT kind of controlled studies are just beginning to get available, right? And therefore, we will see more and more of such aspects figuring into food. Well, this framework at least tells us a few things from an Ayurveda perspective, right, as to what to do. Uh, and I've pointed out about 5 of these, right? So I said that, hey, dosha dictates what Agni is. So therefore, you could have doshic foods, which is like if any of the doshas are overexcited, you would want to suppress them. And so therefore, you align food to your doshas. Uh, then Agni food, right? If the Agni is not right, you need to improve, and that's the appetizers maybe that you could think of, right? So the Deepan kind of foods. So that's Agni foods that you need to have in your diet. If the Mala is not functioning right, then it's the Anuloman, right? Which is make sure your excretory functions are right, right? If the transition of the food across the tissues, the rasa into the food into the rasa dhatu and rata dhatu is not right, then you go to number 4, which is the rasayana foods, right? Which allow you to move the rasas from one rasa to the next rasa and so forth. And if ama is getting accumulated, then it's the cleanse foods, right, which are required, or the cleanse therapies which are required. So that gives you a general guideline as to how do you assess yourself and how can you start personalizing food. No, it gives you a framework, right? Besides this framework, if you start reading the culinary literature around Ayurveda and tradition, you come up with a few other rules, right? One, you realize, and I put down about 6 of them here. Many people ask, what is specific about Indian culinary, right? Is there are there special techniques? Are there what is so special about it? And I think these are 6 things that I find very special in the Indian culinary sciences. One is this whole emphasis around Nitya Sevaniya Ahar, right? Which is that, nutrition versus stimulation, which is that the key property of food is that it stimulates us, right? It stimulates and excites us. And when we say excite, it gives you the 3 dimensions of excitation, the vata, the pitta, the kapha. And I'll talk about that the next slide or so. And the emphasis on food is that food needs to be tridoshik largely, that for every one food item which excites a vata, there need to be 3 food items which are pacifying the vata, right? And so on. So it's largely tridoshik in nature, as we call, right? Or non-stimulating. That's the key characteristic of food versus medicine, which is largely excitation, right? Then the concept of 6 rasas at every meal, right? And that's a full-fledged lecture separately. But the importance of having all 6 tastes or food groups, therefore, you could think of almost, right, on every meal. And we're beginning to understand that the role that, say, a pungent food plays at every meal, the role that a astringent or a kashaya plays at every meal, the role that a amla plays at every meal. Today, the people testing what happens if I have vinegar before food, right? And what's the effect of that on my glycemic excursions? What's the impact of fat? No, the fate of fat based on the pungent ingredients that I have, because they can work through the TRP pathways and can result in uncoupling, the mitochondrial uncoupling, as we say, and dictate whether I will store fat or burn it as to produce heat and energy. Uh, and especially the astringent foods, right, which the astringent foods, the kashaya foods, would make sure that the body stays in when we eat food, we are actually, the postprandial state is considered to be a pro-oxidant stage, a pro-oxidative stage. And the kashaya ingredients ensure that at least in our gut, we have a antioxidant state and anti-inflammatory state, right? Post-food. So it's not sufficient that I have one taste the astringent in the morning and feel I'm okay. It needs to be there at every meal, because every meal is a pro-oxidant stage. So we need those antioxidants in our gut at every meal. The next one is the personalization based on Prakriti dosha framework, right? That we require, and that's a very interesting tool, which seems to be there in the Indian context, right? The culinary practice. Then food synchronized to rhythms of life, right? Which is the foods we need to eat only at breakfast and not at dinner. Foods to be eaten from a seasonal perspective in the winter and not in the summer. Life stage as well, for every decade of our life, right? There are foods which are specified based on function. So those kind of rules are not even being, we haven't, our modern nutrition science, I don't find sufficient papers even tackling seasonal effects of foods, for example, right? And there's a whole regimen given in Ayurvedic texts. Similarly, food pairing principles, right? Especially the Virudh rules do not have this and this combination together. About 40 or so rules are there. That's very unique. And then the whole nutrition sequencing, right? Which is just becoming popular in modern science. The word I've taken from the papers which are coming up, no, in really good journals, which is the order in which we partake food. And that seems to be a lot of literature in Ayurveda around the sequencing based on the rasas, right? Or the food groups as to what should come first and what next. And they are personalized based on the body type. So those are some key principles, I think, which will gather more and more as we write about them, we test them in our labs. They'll gather more and more momentum in popular science and modern science as well, right? Body typing. So that was around the mapping algorithm, as you said. So now let's come to this body typing, right? And what Ayurveda talks about. So body typing, all of us are familiar about genotyping. How do we type body? Well, we could genotype. More recently, epigenome typing is becoming popular, and even more recently, microbiome typing, right? And if you look at these three things, genome is what we are stuck with, right? But luckily, we've realized that okay, any changes in our genome may take about 10,000 years or so to execute, right? We were non-milk digesters as a world 10,000 years ago when we took to farming and domesticated cattle. And today, more than half the world can digest milk, right? So we've reached a T50, as we call, right, in about 10,000 years or so. Epigenome allows us transitions way more quickly, because the way our lifestyles are changing, and how do we adapt so quickly if our genome moves so slowly, is through the epigenome, right, which is probably transmitted every 2-3 generations, right? So that allows us a quicker time scale. And microbiome, why it's so much of interest? Because that seems to, we could actually change our typing in a few weeks, right? And that's the interest, why in that order, that the interest has now shifted to microbiome first, then epigenome, and then genotyping, because of how quickly we can use these two systems to change our body type, right, in some sense. Right? From an Ayurveda perspective, body typing is defined from our response to change, right? How do we respond to change? And we have 3 axes that I look at, which is the Vata typically seems to be a very rapid response, right, to our stimuli around us, movement of thoughts, breath, heart, blood, fluids, food and feces. We don't really think about these things. These movements happen, right? And these are involuntary almost. And that's what the Vatic responses are, right? The Pitic responses are, they require a certain chemical in our blood to build up, a hormone level to build up, a molecule, first a response, a food molecule to build to a certain level, such as a sugar, that triggers off a response from the brain, eventually reaches the pancreas, insulin level pick up, and then they start deciding what to do between the balance of glucagon and insulin. So it's about 15 minutes or so to trigger and will last for about 2 hours or so, whereas the involuntary is within seconds, right? And then finally, the kaphic response, which is a dampening mechanism almost, works through boundary layers, the mucosa, the adipose tissue, the boundary layers layering our chest, our GI tract, our nervous system, the fat around our neurons, the buccal cavity, the joints, etc., right? Which ensure that we are not over responding to every situation, right? We don't over respond to pain. If we had low fat cells, our nerves would be exposed, right? And they would get overstimulated. So a lot of this, that's one way of looking at bioregulation or response to stimuli, is one way of looking at our the Vata, Pitta, Kapha, right? The Prakriti. That's how I look at it. And the interesting part is there's about 140 or so phenotypic characteristics which are given in Charaka Samhita, physical, physiological, behavioral, which are kind of clustered into 20 gunas or physical attributes, then clustered into 3 doshas, which then define our Prakriti. And this is kind of a map where we have about 200 and nearly 300 people kind of from 5 villages, which is what the 5 series are, and their Prakritic representation on a triangular plane, right? A VPK plane. So, and the whole framework doesn't just end in body typing, but also suggests, if you go to Charaka Samhita, that it also then maps various pathological conditions or disease susceptibilities, as we call, right, to about 1,200 or so pathological conditions. So if this is my doshic profile, I need to be more careful of these because I could be more susceptible to these. And about 1,200 conditions mapped. Also, 600 food ingredients are kind of mapped. Medicinal foods are typed onto that framework, right? So that we could kind of say, hey, if this is my doshic profile, these are my susceptibilities, these are the ingredients I could have more of or less of. So that framework suddenly starts becoming available. And it has been executed, as I said, in various rhythms of our life. We need to synchronize that with the rhythms of life, the daily rhythm, the diurnal rhythm, the seasonal rhythm, and the life stage rhythm. And I give the example of the seasonal rhythm, right? Which is, I've mapped the months, the 12 months here, with the chart shows the green things show the temperature, right? And this is for Delhi, data from 2019, right? Winter time, 20 degrees average temperature, summertime about 40. And this is the humidity, right, in the air, right? So this is basically cold and moist. This is hot and dry, which is the summer month. This is the monsoon, which is hot and wet. Then followed by a season which is, again, beginning to be a little cooler, mid-cool, but again, drier, lower humidity. And then you have the winter, which is cool and moist, right? And based on this, you could then start defining what you are going to be oversensitive to, right? So this season, when you have moist and cold weather, more likely that your kaphic dimension may get overexpressed, right? Your boundary levels. Whereas when it is dry and hot, it's more likely that the vata dimension, the involuntary dimensions, which may get overexpressed. You may get more excited along the vata dimension. Here, you may get more excited in the pitta dimension, and so on, right? And I'll skip slides, but this is an interesting one, right? I spoke about nutrient sequencing, right? And how on the right, I've quoted a few papers over the last decade or so. A couple of them which talk about nutrient sequencing in very good journals. One which talks about, I mentioned, the vinegar consumption can attenuate postprandial, right? So, or the amla rasa, basically saying has an impact on postprandial glucose excursions and insulin excursions. And here we have some algorithms in Ayurveda which says that, hey, if you have to sequence your meal, a standard sequence is you begin with your madhur rasa first, your amla lavan next, and your kattu tikta kashaya next. If you are not feeling, your appetite is low, then this is the sequence you follow. And if you have a vatic profile or a pittic profile or a kaphic profile, then this is the sequence of taste that you should have on your plate. And that's fairly interesting. And I think it's a ready topic for someone to kind of start doing research. You're just beginning to do research on this. And but these are the areas to kind of start picking up, right? Similarly, there are wellness algorithms. You want to execute this, you require how to measure wellness. And again, a beautiful definition for measuring wellness: sama dosha, sama agni, sama dhatu, which is the three balances of dosha, of agni, of dhatu, tissue, a good functioning of the mala or the excretory system, and then the prasan, atma, indriya, and mana, right? This is largely kind of ignored so far in nutrition sciences, right? And uh, uh, but taken care of in at least this algorithm. So we've kind of constructed a questionnaire around, we call it an 11-dimensional questionnaire, which kind of takes all of these into account to assess the wellness of an individual. And lastly, so now we have the mapping algorithm, the body typing done, the wellness done, a little bit of culinary science I hinted at, and food typing, right? And so we have created a database around food typing by going to the Ayurvedic classics and digging up about 2,500 recipes. We have about 1,500 food ingredients there, 200 plus nutritional parameters from modern nutrition science, rasa panchaka, sensory profiles, etc. So various properties taken from Ayurvedic texts, from the NIN food composition tables and the FSSAI schedule 4, right? And the various properties that we have. I'll skip these charts, which talk about the spread of the data in our database, right? Uh, and based on that, we can now look at what is the nutritional composition. So this is an ideal diet. We picked up the hospital diet. We have a sister organization, the hospital, and we've looked at the mapping of ingredients there, the deep diving into the food served there for a week. And then what is the frequency, how many ingredients? So we have about 55, 56 ingredients that are consumed. There's a paper out of University of California, San Diego, Rob Knight's group, which is the leading group on microbiome in the world, which suggests that, hey, for a healthy microbiome, you need to be having 30 plus, more than 30 plant-based ingredients in your diet. So here we have close to about 60 ingredients in our diet, no? Would say healthy ingredients. Another interesting fact, if you look at this chart up here, is that these are the increasing ingredients are in gray, and the reducing number of ingredients which are reducing a certain, Vatakara ingredient is the first one. Vatahara is the red bar. The Pitta Kara, increasing Pitta, reducing Pitta, increasing Kapha, reducing Kapha, and for each day, because the diet is different on each day. And one characteristic you see is, I mentioned that most of our diet needs to be the number of the overstimulation, which is what the positive is. No, number of ingredients which stimulate us or excite us are much lower than those that will take care of the excitation and make sure that we are not in an overstimulated state, right? So that's an interesting profile, of the food. Culinary science, if you really want to, I mentioned, but I think the last thing I wanted to just mention was diet tracking, right? Which becomes an important part of, if you want to do a personalized nutrition, you need to track diet. And what we realized is the currently used questionnaires of food frequency and 24-hour recall questionnaires do not capture the diet in sufficient granularity. So we do need a new set of questions, what we call as a Q stack for diet, a questionnaire stack for diet, which is not just 24-hour and 7-day recall, but also a detailed FFQ that we've developed. And we also have a dietary practices questionnaire, about 12 or so. We have a dietary practice score as well, and a timestamp photo diary that we require to be able to assess, at least in the research stage, this is what we require. Let's see how we can simplify it from practical perspective. And once we have that, you can have what we call at the bottom is the quant descriptive assessment, the immutable data, which is what our body type is, cross-sectional data, longitudinal data through variables, pulse, BP, temperature, sleep quality, etc. And with Prakriti and Swasthya score and these longitudinal data, we are hope to be able to execute a holistic, personalized plan, right? These are some of the tools that we are developing for this. The ones in green are the ones which generally most people are looking at today, but they're expensive tools and will and also limited in some sense. So we think either they need to be complemented to what I have discussed, or for a low cost, a mass execution, probably what we're discussing. We're trying to get to a mass execution tool 20 to 100 rupees a year for the masses without having any involved, right, measurements. Okay, so lastly, I think one slide I thought we'll just put on what are the various programs that we're running in the university. Well, we do have a PhD program, a good PhD program running in our university. We're focused university. Then we have two MSc programs, the Ayurveda biology program that you would have heard if you've taken the attended other webinars through the series. But we also have a MSc by research in food technology and innovation, right? So do spread the word. We have a BVOC and a BSc program that we were launching in September. So for the bachelor's degree, so we're moving, you can see, from PhD to MSc, and now just introducing the BVOC bachelor's program as well. And then we have for audiences, certificate programs, many of them conducted online, the Indian Culinary Science Personalized Nutrition Certificate Program, Microbiome and Nutrition Certificate, where we do, it's a 5-day residential program where we look at DNA extraction, DNA sequencing, and then get into microbiome and nutrition, and even spend 1 day in the kitchen cooking food. So that's a fairly exciting and good program. Goes from the wet lab right to the kitchen. And then protein processing certificate program, which is quite a popular one with industry. We looked at proteins for plant-based milks, plant-based meats, and high protein bakes, protein-rich bakes, etc. And then various micro-certification workshops on functional foods, ghee-based food, food for iron deficiency anemia, for brain health, for metabolic health, etc. So do engage with us and spread the word, please. We'll be grateful if you do that. Overall, I think our goal for our program is that we do feel that India can make a contribution. And many of you are from universities across India. And I think collectively, all of us in a collaborative manner, we do need to do research on some of these foundational concepts, which are very unique to India. And I think this deep knowledge of systemic and molecular properties of food and the relationship with the phenotype and genotype and the vast culinary library that we have can lead the world in this whole area of mass personalization and functional food design. This last slide, again, the addresses, as I said, I'm hoping that all of you on the call have subscribed to our YouTube channel, Ayur Ahar. Also do engage with me and follow me on Twitter or Insta. I have 3 additional addresses here, email addresses: Dr. Sridevi, Lavanya, who's another faculty in our group, and Sugandhi, who is the secretary of our program. And if any of these programs that I mentioned here are of interest and you want to reach out, these are individuals you can reach to as well, right? Sridevi and Lavanya helped me with our culinary science program and processing programs and the personalized nutrition program, and Sugandhi kind of coordinates that. Yeah. So happy to answer any questions, right? I think the last message that, the action that Megha had given me was that how can this be, this journey around integrating Ayurveda and various systems, various ways of things. I mentioned the classical nutrition science, the microbiome, the Ayurveda together into an Ayurahar framework. I think that's the need of the day. That's what is required in industry today. To how do you take these cross-cultural knowledge systems and synthesize them together to solve what are the unsolvable problems of today? Whether they are with respect to human health, they are with respect to livelihoods, or their respect to planetary health and sustainability. I think this integration and synthesis is the key to it. And our university is very passionate about it, which is why it reflects in the name of the university. The University of Transdisciplinary. What is this transdisciplinary? It is about bringing these multicultural knowledge systems, those different cultural knowledge systems together into and the only way to do that is through a transdisciplinary approach, right? So with that, I think I'll stop my sharing and see if there are any discussions that you want to get into.